Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Impact Factor. I am your host, Katie Van Aken, and this week's episode features a friend of mine who is doing his very first semester as a PhD student in neuroscience, and we got to talk about it, and he has some pretty good tips and tricks, so hope you enjoy. All right, Mark. Well, welcome to the show. Good to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So let's just dive in. So where are you now? What's your PhD, current state?
Sure, yeah. So I just started this fall my PhD in neuroscience at the University of Pennsylvania. So yeah, I'm just starting the process now, and yeah, having a really great semester so far. It's been a challenging but exciting transition. So yeah.
So neuroscience. So is that a separate department at Penn?
Yes, it is. It is its own department. So essentially, the neuroscience graduate group, or NGG, is like what we call ourselves. We're under a larger umbrella of many other graduate schools, graduate programs within the School of Medicine. So we're kind of lumped together with a bunch of other, like, immunology, oncology, molecular biology, all these other disparate disparate but also like related research focuses. We're all kind of grouped together, of neuroscience being just like one program within what's called the biomedical graduate studies at Penn.
Oh, very cool. And so if you're in this School of Medicine, are you do you like walk by the med school, like the med students, or are you separate though, like in a physical way?
Yeah, I think it depends on. So within neuroscience, as I'm happy to talk a ton about, there is like a wide variety of people doing either, wet lab, really like molecular cell biology type approaches to understanding maybe how neurons behave, or how like really kind of like fine-grained levels of complexity produce, cognition and behavior. But there's also people like me who do more computational and kind of systems level things, which we can use kind of like brain imaging methods like MRI to study, which is doesn't really, doesn't involve working with cells or with animals. It really works with more focused on like patients and human brain imaging. So to answer your question, it really depends on what kind of neuroscience you're doing that determines who you're interacting with, or what kind of labs you're kind of sharing spaces and resources with.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think so. I've obviously been interviewing a bunch of STEM people, but I don't think I've talked to someone whose focus was a computational discipline. And so, what's I mean, you've only been there a few months, but what's different? Like my experience in grad school is we had a lab where we did experiments, and then we'd go back to our desk that they gave us. That is where we would write papers or like goof off. But what is it like for you doing computational work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so to give some context, like before I got into the program, I was also working at Penn in a neuroscience lab, but as like a staff member. I had a data analyst position, and I actually got that job March 2020, right when the pandemic just started. It was actually fantastic timing because Penn actually went through a hiring freeze like immediately after I got the offer, and so there was some negotiation with like the dean and stuff to actually get me the position in that, obviously unprecedented, circumstance.
Yeah.
It was pretty crazy, but I was grateful to have gotten the job, and obviously that data analyst position in this neuroimaging lab. Then I worked with Yvette Shaline in the psychiatry department. A lot of that research was focused on depression and anxiety, and what we can learn about relating brain activity using fMRI to different types of symptoms in depression, anxiety, and PTSD. But since I started that during the pandemic, Yeah, I was able to, by the nature of my work, do it completely remotely. Yeah, so it was all on my computer, and essentially all the data is stored on like a computing cluster that I could just like log into from home and
Nice.
do all of my, yeah, like, processing and analyses without having to physically be there. Now, of course, for other parts of the lab, like actually like recruiting patients and bringing them in and scanning them, there was kind of no avoiding
Yeah.
having some personnel being there. Of course, the pandemic kind of put human subjects research in general at a halt for a while. But fortunately, we were sitting on so much data that there was tons of interesting stuff for me to work on. I had way more than I was even able to do in 2 years without having any new data, essentially. So yeah, it was kind of ideal that yeah, it was just kind of sitting there waiting to be analyzed, and yeah.
That's cool. So you did 2 years as like a researcher in a
Mhm.
related but not the same lab, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And do you think those 2 years, well, one, was that intentional because you wanted to take kind of a break before you applied to grad school?
Yeah, theoretically, well, so during my senior year, I started prepping my applications for grad school. I was thinking about applying to PhD, neuroscience PhD programs then. And as I was kind of preparing the application, I had probably what many people experience of like, do I really know what I want to do? Like,
5 years is a long time. Yeah.
exactly. And I had also just I only had 1 year of neuroscience research at that point. So my understanding of what research, especially at a big institution. So I'm, just like a graduate of Haverford College, very small, and we have some good resources, but nothing
Yeah.
compared to like a big research institution like Penn. And so I guess that was the one thing is I wanted a couple years to figure out, better not only like what the broader scope of research was in the field that I wanted to enter was, but I also theoretically wanted to make a little bit, like get some savings before
That's a good one.
I started grad school. Of course, the position was not that much better paid than what I'm getting now. I mean, a little bit, but
Yeah.
on the latter point, maybe that wasn't really the position I should have taken. But at that point, I was just so thrilled to have had a position that was kind of exactly what I was looking for in terms of growing and developing my skills as a scientist that I knew would translate well into grad school. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's really important to note too because I think a lot of people are maybe not sure about like what research at a big institution is and
Hmm.
they did it for like one REU summer, and they had a good experience, but like we said, 5 years of research is a long time. So if you're not really set on that yet, it's definitely a good idea to kind of do a test run, which is sort of what you did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, so while you were doing that, do you feel so now that you're in your program, do you feel like there are tools and skills that you picked up on because of the research you were doing for those 2 years that have kind of let you hit the ground running a little bit?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, not only were there just like kind of bureaucratic things like, trainings and certifications that
Mm,
I was able to pick up during my 2 years that I can just now continue to use, given that I now started a program at the same institution. It definitely made my transition a lot simpler than someone coming from outside of Penn. But also in terms of the methods, in terms of like what I learned in my last position was how do you work with a computing cluster? How do you like submit jobs and like optimize when you're doing very computationally intensive things? How can you like
yeah.
accomplish that in the most efficient way? That was something that I learned through some troubleshooting in my old position that is going to benefit me for the remainder of my grad research. Also, it gave me a lot of confidence in those couple years.
Yeah.
The nature of the position gave me a lot of independence to kind of try out new things and read kind of papers that were explaining kind of the most cutting edge methods in the field at that point. And I had the space to kind of explore and try out those methods. And At Haverford, I was a math major, and I took a couple computer science courses, but the nature of the position was very much, it was a lot of programming. And so, even though I came in with some programming skills, it was awesome to kind of build confidence in myself as someone who can like, really manage and organize, a complex programming challenge in pursuit of like a research question that I felt like confident in the results that I was producing. So that, without those couple years, I don't think I would have necessarily had, um,
Yeah.
yeah, that same
Which
level of
isn't
expertise.
a bad thing. Not everyone has those 2 years, and so they use their first semester to get used to those things, but
Hmm.
um it sounds like you set yourself up in a good place. So let's talk a little bit about your first couple months or your program. So you're in the neuroscience department. Do you come in assigned to a research group, or is there like a trial move around period?
Right. Yeah. So we do rotations. So we
Okay.
don't go in knowing what specific PI we want to work with. The rule of thumb is that you're supposed to have 3 rotations. You can divide it up however you want, but typically it's done like one in the fall, one in the spring, one in the summer. But there's a lot of flexibility built in the program. You can do, if you feel pretty certain who you want to work with, you can do as little as 2. If you want to keep going, you could do 4 or 5.
Oh,
It really is up to you and about finding like the best fit for you. It's not, they don't really
that's
like
good.
pressure you into picking a lab prematurely, which is I appreciate. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Do do you get to like so are you in one that you picked you picked your first one to try out, and have you been in that the whole semester?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I'm rotating with Professor Aaron Alexander Block, and yeah, his research focuses are similar to my last lab in that they're sort of translational neuroimaging. So basically, like using brain imaging to better understand patient populations and hopefully coming up with like imaging biomarkers that might inform either the diagnosis or treatment of various disorders. But the difference between
Oh,
the lab I'm in now and my previous lab is this lab has a little bit more of a focus on development and genetics. So,
huh.
which I don't have really any expertise in. So it's been, yeah, but I mean, that's the kind of great opportunity about a rotation is to really like explore something a little bit different. But at the same time, it was still within my comfort zone because I was using a lot of the same scientific methods. Yeah.
So with the genetics component, is there an experimental side to his research as well with like genetic sequencing and stuff?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think so yeah, he doesn't do any like GWASs or anything right currently.
Okay.
But for an example of a project that I'm working on that's kind of combines genetics and brain imaging, we're looking at a large sample of patients with DeGeorge syndrome. It's also called 22q11.1 chromosomal deletion syndrome. Hopefully, I didn't box that. I just learned about it this semester. But anyway, um,
I've never heard of it, so sounds
sounds
perfectly
legit.
correct. Yeah.
And basically, we're looking at differences in brain activity between this specific patient population and controls. And the interesting thing about this disorder, it's essentially, yeah, like it's a chromosomal disorder where I think around 30% of people with this specific I guess SNP or this specific genetic variation, 30% of them go on to develop schizophrenia or some type of psychosis. So it's kind of there's not really many cases in which you get such a strong causal relationship between specific genetic changes and really pronounced behavioral and cognitive deficits. And so it's not really well understood exactly how that is like represented in terms of like how brain like uh how specific brain, I guess, deficits or abnormalities in this disorder actually manifest into like the symptoms
The
that these patients,
psychosis.
yeah, present. So it's a really valuable data set that I'm really excited to like be spending some time untangling. I don't have any dramatic results yet, but I'm hoping by the end of the semester I will have some sort of interesting conclusions based off of my rotation research. So we'll see. We'll see.
Very cool. So you're doing all of this, and are you taking classes too?
Yes, and I'm taking classes as well. Yeah, I don't know if
I
you want
remember
me
the
to.
days.
Yeah.
Well, you don't have to tell me about your classes. They're probably
Yeah.
normal classes, but how has the sort of transition to balancing classwork and research been?
Yeah, I mean, it's been challenging, but also there is a level of, you know, and I'm learning to take agency over what feels most important to me at that time.
Oh,
If I need to really like hone in on studying for a class or learning some concept outside of my research, then I'll just tell my PI, this is what I was able to get done, but I'm sorry, I couldn't have accomplished much more. And on other times, I'll be kind of completely engulfed in my research, and I'll completely procrastinate all of my
yeah.
class coursework and studying. So it's it has been like an ebb and flow throughout the semester of yeah, what my priorities have been, but I think it's worked out okay. I mean, I think my luckily my PI has been super understanding, and I've been doing okay in my classes, so it's paid off so far, whatever approach
There
I've
you
done.
go.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
I remember very distinctly the classes that I took that were taught by my PI were the
Hmm.
ones where I like procrastinated the most because I was like, "Oh, he'll get it." Like I hope you're not listening,
Yeah.
Gary, but I was like, because I could always be like, "Oh, I didn't finish this because I was writing a paper for you." Like it was
Right.
always kind of a weird balancing act, but it sounds like you are in a pretty good found a pretty good groove already, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, but I it isn't always easy, and I think there's something I've learned very quickly that you kind of have to pick your battles between you got your research, you got your classes, and then you got like your mental health, and then you got like your relationships, and you know. Throughout this semester, I've experienced extremes of like, having to kind of neglect one point or the other at various times. And I've been okay at managing to like keep things as balanced as possible, but it's impossible to do everything at once, which is the
That's
the
what
reality
they
I'm learning.
say. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what they say.
yeah.
Um, all right, so I want to jump back a little bit to how you got here. So, you said you were a math major in undergrad. Did
Mhm.
you take psych courses as well,
Yeah.
or
So,
neuroscience
mhm.
courses? I guess you mentioned a little bit. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. So Haverford didn't have a neuroscience major, for reference, which, so
shocker.
yeah. So my sophomore year, when it's time to pick a major, I was having a sort of, actually the summer before my sophomore year, I was having a bit of an existential crisis because I found myself really fascinated by, you know, applying what I knew I wanted to do math, and I knew I was interested and pretty good at math, but I didn't really know what I wanted to use it for. I was like, maybe I'll be an actuary, maybe I'll go into like, I
Yeah,
don't know, business or something.
said every
Um,
math major ever. I like math, but what do I do with it, right?
exactly. It's not I'm not the only math major with that existential dilemma early on, but yeah. So I was I don't know, really kind of doing some soul searching about where I wanted to employ the computational and quantitative methods that I was learning in class, and how could I do something that I felt good about that might actually have some sort of impact. And I, I so for my older sister is actually also a cognitive science PhD student who was also thinking about the brain and studying the brain, and um, I I kind of had some very fascinating and in-depth conversations with her, and I was like, maybe I should try taking a neuroscience class my sophomore year, before I kind of committed completely to a major and see what I thought of it. And um, the professor that I had was fantastic, and I kind of knew a couple weeks in the course, I was like, oh my god, I want to do neuroscience. It was just like the most
Wow.
exciting content, and also very quickly I we had a lecturer actually from Penn come, and she did very computational research, and I kind of saw for the first time like, applied neuroscience research using all of these concepts I was learning in my class, and I kind of like really saw myself and got really excited by neuroscience as an opportunity to kind of apply my math skills. So I kind of knew my sophomore year that was like, okay, I want to do neuroscience. But there was no major, so I played around with like making my own major. I was like, maybe I'll make a computational neuroscience major for myself. But I found that prospect to be kind of isolating, so I kind of just stuck with like, being a math major and a neuroscience minor. So then, kind of skipping to the end of my undergrad, the summer before my senior year, I got a research position in a lab. Um, that was with Dr. Rebecca Compton, and we studied human attention and executive
Oh,
function, particularly like how basically like behavioral and brain responses to making mistakes, like how we respond to making errors and how we monitor errors, and do errors cause like does it cause like us to make corrective behaviors, or
yeah.
does making errors just kind of like mess up for the subsequent task performance and like decision making and things like that. So it
Wow,
was an
that's
interesting
so
question.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was really cool. And luckily from that, I mean, I used some neuroimaging methods in that lab, and that was sort of my into the Penn lab where I got that position right before the pandemic. And a really satisfying conclusion to my undergrad was I also, for my math thesis, I did like a statistics thesis where I analyzed data from my lab, which was really cool. A lot of the data that I
Oh,
collected. So it was a really
oh,
satisfying
cool.
way of synthesizing, my math and neuroscience interests. Yeah, in a way
And
that,
otherwise, that data
yeah.
would have gone unanalyzed, or is
Uh,
that
it,
sort of
yeah, so we're analyzing those data, but I tried a more sophisticated statistical
uh,
method than what my lab was like currently using.
applying
So
your math background?
right, right.
Very cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
honestly, until like you and I started hanging out, I had never really thought about how like neuroscience is a very classic um, interdisciplinary field because you have it's so complex. The brain is so complex, right? And obviously there's biology to it, but there's also chemical reactions going on. There's also, and you're using all this computation to understand these really high powerful imaging and um yeah, I don't know. And there's the psychology part of it too, which, is a whole nother field, which is just it's so fascinating.
Yeah, it's very interdisciplinary, which is, yeah, it's very exciting to be a part of that
Very
community
cool.
for that reason. Definitely. Yeah.
Um so when do you think, and so when you were in undergrad, your older sister was getting her PhD in related, is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah,
So
I yeah, definitely.
okay, so at what point did you feel like that might be what you wanted to do?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question. I my sister's doing, even though she's in the realm of cognitive science and neuroscience, she's doing very different things. Her
Uh-huh.
focus is more in, so she was a computer science major and gained a lot of interest in what the field calls reinforcement learning. So using reward or punishments to facilitate learning. But there's a lot of theory behind how reward like reward-based decision making changes depending on your environment, and it's best to like understand that through computational models that are very kind of yeah, very,
Oh.
it's very abstract, but it also
Yeah.
has a lot of applications to like machine learning and AI and things like that.
Mm.
um, Meanwhile, like my interest has come to be more in using neuroscience to diagnose and kind of treat patients and better understand mental disorders. So,
Disorders, yeah.
but they are definitely intrinsically related in a lot of ways, because
Yeah.
in disorders like schizophrenia, a lot of the pathways affected are dopamine pathways, and dopamine is the neurotransmitter that is facilitates reward. It's an
Yeah.
oversimplification, but it's a neuromodulator that definitely like influences your decision making. So there's a lot of different ways in which you can indirectly and directly relate not only like deficits in brain disorders to these kind of like larger cognitive functions, and then vice versa, like by understanding these sort of like more abstract systems level functions, we can then bring that to the clinic and use that for like
Yeah.
translational findings. So
Cool.
yeah, it's a two-way street.
I can like
Yeah.
feel the wheels spinning in my own brain while I'm listening to you. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, so so when did you decide you wanted to get your PhD?
Yeah, I mean, I knew probably my senior year, I knew that like I mean, I feel like I was just kind of like trying to get by with my classes and just like life in college. And I knew I wanted to stay in neuroscience, but and I assumed that would have taken, the form
Yeah.
of a PhD.
Because you
But
wanted to study that field and you couldn't fully major in it, and so you felt
right.
like you needed to have additional education, right?
Definitely, definitely.
Cool.
And so I guess I was also open-minded that like maybe I would join a lab and hate it and then like want to pivot, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I didn't really think so. I never really wavered since I've started in neuroscience research that it's the field that I want to stay in, at least for the remainder of my PhD for sure. And yeah, so I would say like senior year was when I sort of like, realized that I definitely want to pursue a PhD, but I didn't feel like I was like ready yet. So, mhm.
Nice. Very cool. Do you know or do you have any inkling about what you want to do after your PhD? And you are completely allowed to say no.
Yeah, so I originally going into grad school was like, oh, I want to do the kind of traditional academia route. Like, I feel like I
Hmm.
uh, could see myself being a postdoc and then going for like assistant professorship
I
positions
think you would be a
because
very good professor, Mark. But continue.
thank you. Yeah, I mean, and I do love teaching and mentoring as well. I had while I was a data analyst before I started my PhD, I had the opportunity to train up a few data analysts under me, and it was very gratifying watching things click for people and to kind of get people excited about this research. It was satisfying. Um, so I think going into grad school, I felt like that was the route. The main, not only for the teaching aspects that I kind of enjoyed that, but also because, I feel like all researchers love having like autonomy and independence over their research. And that was sort of like the best way to really have control over the types of questions you want to ask and how you want to answer them. But I also like on the flip side, I think um, academia isn't the exactly ideal in many ways, and
Yeah.
in some ways it is also an exploitative sort of structure, just as kind of private enterprises and businesses are. So I think I have a degree of openness where if I can get a lot of like freedom to ask questions and like lead a team in industry, then I'm definitely open-minded to that possibility where I could also make a lot more money. But you
Yes.
know, um, but I'm kind of undecided. An interesting thing about neuroscience also is that I think the field is changing so quickly because it's such a new field, and I think the types of jobs available to people with my background come 5 years from now, it might be very different than what is currently available in terms of not I mean, I feel like there's tons of like biotech startups relating to, human brain interfaces or new, devices for, used to diagnose or treat, various brain conditions. And so I think there's going to be an expansion of opportunities in industry that I'm definitely open-minded to considering. So,
It's awesome.
yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. I think that will happen. And my advice to you is to start early the process of talking to people in the field. So go to conferences and talk to people who have jobs in these areas and
Hmm.
and use these 5 years to get a sense of what feels like a good fit for you. Because obviously you're going to experience the academic side, like that's by default, you're going to live in that for 5 years. So,
Right.
talk to people who are doing other things with it, because that's the best way, I think, to find out what's exciting to you.
Yeah, definitely. I've already like, I think like 80% of people, I've seen the stats. 80% of people coming out of my grad program go into academia, but there's still like a fair amount of
Really?
people who go into industry. So, and
You're right,
since,
that might be shifting.
yeah,
It
yeah,
might
it
be,
might
yeah,
be, it might be. But it's, I definitely will seek out those perspectives for
yeah.
sure. Yeah.
There's some advice that you didn't ask for. That's why I have a podcast. So all right, so you're balancing school, you're balancing research. Um, what do you do for fun, Mark? What do you have time to do outside of all of that? Anything?
I do play club soccer with you,
Hmm.
which is great. It's always fun to, get some exercise, play some soccer. I played soccer in high school and college. It's good to have some continuity and to spend some time with friends. So that's a big one. That's a big consistent one. I also am a musician. So I was in a band in high school and an a cappella group in college. So I, play a lot of guitar and singing in my uh, in my free time. So I write some music and looking
Nice.
forward to putting some stuff out in the near future. And yeah, so I mean, definitely music's a big part of my life. I love going to concerts. So Philly has a great concert scene. So there's plenty of great live music to experience. Those are the main things I feel like. And then I, love spending time with my dog Barkley. I think yeah, that's the trifecta: soccer, music, and Barkley. I feel like
Wow.
that's mainly my life, which
It's a pretty
no
full life you
complaints.
got there.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, it's that I play soccer too, and I played it in grad school, and um, it's just a good to like break from the stress. Like you're running around on a soccer field, and you can't think about all of the data that you have to analyze. There's just like
Yeah.
nothing you can do about it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a good um balance to have.
Hmm.
Um, all right. Well, I want to wrap up with two questions that I've been asking many of our guests.
Okay.
The first one is what will maybe be difficult, but it is what was something that was challenging for you, um, well, when you started grad school, which was in the past few months. Anything that challenged you or surprised you about the experience?
Yeah. I'm trying not to be redundant. I feel like the immediate answer is the kind of being pulled in many different directions. That's been a challenge. Yeah, like really being able to navigate and prioritize the right things at the right moments has taken the most kind of like cognitive effort.
Mm.
And uh, yeah, maybe that's a bad answer, but
No, that's a fine answer.
I do think that that's been the main, um, yeah,
Like even
the
even though
main
you're
complicated
you've
thing to navigate. Yeah.
yeah, like even though you've sort of maybe figured it out where you are now, when you first started, did you find that overwhelming? That was like an overwhelming challenge was how do I meet the needs of my PI and also my classes and stuff like that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. And I think as an undergrad, homework will bleed into your life in a very, uncontrollable way. And
Yeah.
having spent a couple years then having a kind of 9 to 5 where at 5 o'clock I could really just, shut down and really not, kind of bookend whatever I was working on until the next day or the next week. And then to go back into kind of like now having my work life balance completely eroded.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah,
is
welcome back to school, Mark.
yeah. It was a rude awakening. And yeah, and just it was adjustment for my partner Madison too. I mean, not being able to just like you know, be
Go out to
fun.
dinner. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So yeah, that I think that was unexpected how kind of hard that was. But you know,
Here we
I
are.
yeah, here we are exactly.
Here we are.
Uh,
Um, Great. Well, no, that was a fine answer. I'm sure people will relate to that as well. And then my last question is, if you had to give yourself advice, what would it be like 4 months ago? If you had to give 4 months ago Mark some advice, what would that be? And it's okay if it is related to what we just talked about.
well, yeah, relatedly,
Yeah.
appreciate your work-life balance while you had it. Definitely.
Yeah.
Nah, I think a specific thing I would have maybe encouraged myself to do, especially while I had more freedom and was less kind of hindered by the kind of day-to-day like stresses and busyness. I wish I had like communicated and reached out to a lot more people in the neuroscience community at Penn outside of human brain imaging and outside of like kind of what I was comfortable in. I've kind of discovered through not only my classes, but also like hearing from a bunch of different professors at Penn and like the type of research that they're doing. Um, I maybe like would have been a little bit more like broad and open-minded into alternative research domains and focuses if I had maybe sought out perspectives from people doing things entirely different from me. And I don't think necessarily that the people that I'm currently rotating and am planning on rotating with are like overly pigeonholed. Like they
Sure.
all it's still a diverse bunch of people with diverse research interests, but I think there is kind of this glorious opportunity for your freedom to choose your path in that early
Yep.
stage of grad school. And I think uh, giving yourself as much breadth and perspective as possible in those early moments will set you up to feel most satisfied and certain of your ultimate decision in the case that you have a rotation kind of
That's
program.
great.
So that's kind of what I would have told myself 4 months
No,
ago
that's
for
great. And
sure.
even if you don't have a rotation, I feel like the earlier you become aware of the breadth of related cool stuff going on in your backyard, which is Penn,
Hmm.
that's the nice thing about academia is you're surrounded by these people doing cool stuff. And so, do you think there could be possibilities for collaboration with any of these people that you're just now discovering? Is that, a possibility?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some people are doing really kind of out there stuff,
Out
which I
there?
feel
Yeah,
like
yeah.
they're doing stuff that like no one else is doing, which is super cool to like learn from. And yeah, no, definitely. I mean, for example, next a good example is next semester I'm doing epilepsy research, but in the context of like human brain imaging. But I also met and got to like do a lab tour of someone doing epilepsy research in mice or with kind of
Ah,
VR setups with mice and stuff and like how epilepsy alters various like cognitive functions and things like that. And it's pretty wild, but even though I think the important thing is that especially when you're focused on a specific type of brain condition, you need kind of all levels to really bridge a complete and create and establish a holistic understanding and to really like treat these things, right? And so it's been cool being exposed to people tackling similar questions but using entirely different methods, and definitely I definitely could see possible collaborations with those labs to the extent that I understand their research.
yeah. No, I
Yeah.
love that. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's really good advice, Mark. Well, I think that's all my questions. Is there anything you want to share that we missed? Anything you want to plug? Any papers coming out? Did you publish it all during your 2 years in the lab?
Yeah. I published twice with my Haverford lab and three times with my Penn lab. And I think the rate of publishing using kind of more like computational kind of approaches is a little quicker because
It is.
you don't have to
Yeah.
wait on like, your animals to
Yep.
develop and like all these sorts of like, variables that just kind of prolong the length of research projects. And then if those projects don't work out, then you're really screwed.
Yeah.
So
Even in my field of energy storage, it was
yeah.
the computational labs that were churning out papers and papers and
Hmm.
papers. And so yeah, I mean, I think it's good that you recognize that, but
Yeah.
I talk about this with other people too, that like it's really the quality of what you're putting out, not the quantity. So
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, short answer is, yeah, I've been grateful to, get a few co-author publications. I still haven't got my first author publication, but I'm working on some projects that could definitely lead to that. So, I guess follow Marc Jaskir with a C on Google Scholar, and
yeah, let's go.
you'll see what's up. So,
Ooh, that's the first time I've had someone plug their Google Scholar profile. I feel like that's gonna be a new thing.
hey, it's
Um,
important.
yeah, you know when you listen to podcasts and they're like interviewing an actor and they're like, "Where can they find you?" And they're like, "Oh, follow me on Instagram." I can do the same thing, but I'll be like, "And where can they find your publications?" Marc
Yeah.
Jasker with a C.
I've been envious of some researchers make fantastic websites for themselves, which I might spend the time to
Mm,
like make a markjasker.com at some point and plug my music and research in the same space or
yeah.
something like that. I feel like that's a great way to like, I don't know, demonstrate just what's going on in a way that's easy for people to find. And I think like importantly, it's important to like make your research accessible to people outside of the field. And so like things like blog posts or like informative videos. I have someone in my cohort making neuroscience related TikToks, like all these types of
Ooh.
like ways of making this type of research accessible to people, I think is really important, and it really is something that I think the field of science fails to do sometimes in a pretty dramatic way. So yeah, I definitely think over the course of my PhD, I don't know. I don't only hope to be an expert at something, but I hope to become an expert communicator.
Ooh.
So that's a kind of like mini goal under just like, doing my dissertation.
Graduation.
So
Yeah.
yes, exactly.
Very cool. Well, it was really fun to talk to you, Mark, and
Yeah, you too.
thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks to Mark for coming on the show. If you or someone you know wants to be interviewed on Impact Factor, feel free to reach out via Instagram and follow us for updates at @ImpactFactorPod. Thank you all for listening and have a great week.